Hello, this is Introduction to GUI Programs. GUI stands for Graphical User Interface, and this is the first in a series of 4 lessons which will explain how to convert your existing programs so that they have a GUI. In this lesson, I'll briefly revisit the IPO model of program structure. I'll remind you how IPO is handled in a text-based program like the one you've already written, and then show you how IPO is handled by a GUI program. In this lesson, I won't show you how to write the GUI code, but I'll introduce the ideas. So the IPO model is that the program receives input from the user, processes it to change it in some way, and then outputs the result. It's a very simple model of how programs work. So let's see how the IPO model is implemented in a text-based program. I've got a really simple example. Here it is. It's a currency converter. It takes input as pounds, converts them into euros, and then outputs the number of euros. Here's the input part of the program. So we use the Python input command. There's a prompt to the user. The user will type something, and that input by the user will be stored in a variable called pounds. I'm pretty sure that's familiar to you. And then the variable pounds is processed. And in this example, it's processed by a function called convert. So pounds is sent to the function convert, there it is, as a parameter, and convert returns a result which is stored into a new variable called euros. So we've got a value being passed up as a parameter and a different value being returned to the main program. Again, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with that. And then finally, having stored the value that we want in the variable called euros, we use the print command to output the value. So go back over that if it's not clear, but that's the basic way that we have implemented IPO up to now. And the output, because this isn't a GUI program, what the user will see on the screen is just very plain text-based and not particularly exciting. A couple of other features that you'll notice in this program are that I've got a loop so that the user can repeatedly enter these values and see the result, and there's exception handling, which I've used for validation. Again, you should be familiar with all of those, but we will look at how all of these are implemented in a GUI over the next few lessons. So let's look at how a GUI program handles IPO. First of all, input. If you want to get input from the user, you can have an input box on the screen where the user can type anything, and that's very similar to the text input that you provide in a Python program. You can also allow the user to make choices by clicking on buttons or choosing from a drop-down menu. All these are inputs. Of course, your program will have processing, but a GUI has a kind of processing that's called event-driven programming. That means that the processing doesn't happen until the user does something, and typically we'll have a button on the screen, and when the user clicks on the button, the processing will happen. So the procedures or functions that you've already written in your program, will link them to buttons on the interface, and the user will click on the button and your program will run. We'll learn more about this in the next lesson. And finally, of course, your GUI will have output. Typically that will be text, but it's quite easy to display an image as output, and we can vary the colour and size of what the user sees, and we can add motion and sound. I'm not going to talk about that much, but you can do your own research and find out how. I'll explain how you can learn more. So I've shown you how a GUI will handle input, processing and output, and here's a very plain example. You can see that the user has input 99 into a text box, clicked on the convert button, and the program has converted it into euros and displayed it. I added absolutely no features at all to this GUI. So here's a better example. It's the same thing, but I've just added a couple of features. I've added some colour, I've set the sizes of the text, I've spaced it out a little better so it's got a better layout, and I've entered some messages and labels for the user. And it's very easy to do this. So this is, I'll show you how to build this in the next lesson. So in the next lesson, I'll show you how to make a GUI by creating a window and adding the different features. They're called widgets. So we'll just add these widgets and then space them out and add color so it looks just the way that you want. It's actually quite easy to do. So to recap, I've talked about how a GUI handles input, processing and output, and very briefly mentioned how you can improve the GUI by having a little think about the visual design of your interface. What I think you should do now is go back to your prototype version and identify the inputs, the processing and the outputs that you will need to include in your GUI. Sketch a draft for how your GUI might look. You're not forced to make it look like that in the long run, but it'll give you some ideas. And think about some of the features that you might like to add that I haven't talked about today. For example, if you want to have an image appear on your GUI. Okay, so in the next lesson, I'll show you how to start building some of these features. So see you then. Bye for now.